My name is Lesley Brook. I'm at Otago Polytechnic in Dunedin, New Zealand. My topic is evaluating the emotional impact of environmental artworks using Q methodology. We know that the visual arts engage and move people. They can prompt people to see issues differently and hence influence attitudes and behaviour. But how might we evaluate that emotional impact? Increasingly, the funders of arts research programs and institutions are seeking evidence of impact. So we need to find new ways to assess the impact of art. This is a case study that evaluated the emotional impact of an exhibition, The Complete Entanglement of Everything. It was held at the Dunedin School of Art, Otago Polytechnic, from 26 September to 2nd of October last year. There were about 60 environmental artworks by 48 different artists, and they were in a wide range of genre. So there were sculptures, paintings, prints, fabric works, video and sound works. So the research methodology needed to be able to manage all of these different artworks and also manage both positive and negative emotional responses. So I chose to use Q methodology, which is ideal for inquiry into the subjective experience of participants. In Q methodology, the participants are the variables. They sort a set of similar things according to an instruction. And that set of similar things is usually statements, but can also be images, sounds, smells, video clips, objects, and artworks. So I found a few studies that used Q methodology with images to measure emotional responses, but they were not images of artworks. I found 3 studies that used Q methodology with images of artworks, but not to measure emotional responses. And I found 1 study that used Q methodology with an artwork to measure an emotional response, but it was not using images, it was using statements. So I believe this is the first study that has used Q methodology to evaluate emotional responses to artworks using images. And it is also, I think, the first study to use Q methodology with images of artworks after the research participants have seen the original artworks in an exhibition. So with ethics approval from Capable New Zealand at Otago Polytechnic Research Ethics Subcommittee, I recruited 25 adult participants who had seen the exhibition. There were 19 women and 6 men. They were aged from their 20s to their 70s, with every decade represented. They were predominantly of Caucasian or European ethnicity, which is usual for Dunedin. There was a symposium held in the first 2 days of the exhibition. So I asked about symposium attendance. 60% of participants had attended at least half a day of the symposium. They lived all over Dunedin, and 56% had quite high level of experience with contemporary art, and some of those were artists themselves. So I met with each of these participants one-on-one within 2 weeks of the exhibition closing, which was within 3 weeks of them having seen the exhibition. I gave them a set of 54 laminated photographs of the artworks from the exhibition, which were shuffled randomly. And I asked them to sort those photographs according to their emotional response to the artworks, not to the photographs, and to arrange them in this pyramid shape you can see in this slide, according to the strength of their emotional response. So the strongest negative emotional responses are at the far left, and the strongest positive emotional responses are at the far right. And I then asked each participant to explain their 4 strongest positive emotional responses and the 4 strongest negative emotional responses. So each Q sort can be correlated with the Q sorts from all the other participants to identify patterns between them and hence reveal groups of participants who shared similar emotional responses or similar points of view. So I used the software PQ method to analyse all of the Q sorts, and after Varimax rotation, produced 5 factors. With 54 photographs, the significant factor loading was 35% for the P less than 0.01 significance level. And 21 of my 25 participants loaded significantly onto one of these 5 factors. So for factor 1, we had 7 participants, Q sorts load significantly, 5 positively and 2 negative loading. Factor 2, 6 participants significantly loaded. Factor 3, 4 participants, and factors 4 and 5, 2 participants each. There were 3 participants whose Q sorts were confounded. They loaded significantly on more than one factor. And one of those that was confounded with factors 2 and 5 was positive for one and negative for the other. And that left only one participant who did not load significantly on any of the 5 factors. So these 5 factors explained only 40% of the variance. So although there were patterns of response, of emotional response, the individual characteristics of the participants still explained most of their emotional response to these artworks. So then I went to the semi-structured interviews and the qualitative data there to try to explain these 5 factors. One difference between the 5 factors was the level of experience with contemporary art. That was not surprising because that's been recorded previously in the literature. So the participants whose Q sorts significantly loaded on factors 1 and 4, generally speaking, were relatively inexperienced with contemporary art compared with the participants whose Q sorts significantly loaded on factors 2, 3, and 5. The second influence that explains these 5 factors was surprising and was not something that I was aware of from the literature. And that is the participants' differing perception of their negative emotions. So there were some people represented by factors 1 and 5 who gave a positive Q sort ranking to their positive emotions and a negative Q sort ranking to their negative emotions. That's relatively straightforward. By negative emotions, I mean sadness, grief, frustration, a sense of being overwhelmed or horrified, or bleakness and discomfort. Those were all words that participants used. But there were also participants who, yes, they gave a positive Q sort ranking to their negative emotions and a negative Q sort ranking to negative emotions, but they also gave a negative Q sort ranking to unengaging artworks. And then there were a few participants, the 6 participants represented by factor 2, who gave a positive Q sort ranking to both their positive and their negative emotions. And when I asked in these semi-structured interviews, I asked why that was, they explained that they were pleased. That was a positive experience for them, that the artwork had succeeded in moving them, even though the emotion that resulted from the artwork moving them was a negative emotion predominantly. It was still a positive experience for them. So these people gave a negative Q sort ranking only to the artworks that they found unengaging. So they used words to describe these unengaging artworks as boring or blah. And also they put their artworks that they found really off-putting as well. So another way to look at the differences between the 5 factors is through the actual artworks themselves. So these 3 artworks are sufficient to explain the differences between the 3 factors. The people who are represented by factor 1 had a negative emotional response to all 3 of the artworks shown on this slide. The people represented by factor 2 had a positive response to all 3 of the artworks represented on this slide. People represented by factor 3 had a positive response only to one of the three, shown top right, which is a set of sculptures by Michelle Beavers. People represented by a factor 4 had a positive response only to the artwork shown at left, which is a sculpture by Esther de Jong. And people represented by factor 5, of these three artworks, they had a positive response only to the artwork represented bottom right, which is a set of posters by the artist who goes by the pseudonym Toothfish. So the theme of the exhibition was the Anthropocene, and these artworks represented different artists' responses to climate change and to other effects of human activity on our environment. So then some general observations. The number of artworks and the variety of both genre and content were a strength of this case study. Q methodology does not require a large number of participants, 25 was ample, because they're sorting 54 different photographs. So there were actually millions of possible arrangements of those photographs according to their emotional responses. Emotional response is a very complex phenomenon. Nevertheless, participants were able to sort along a positive, negative dimension, but the complexity of the emotional response became apparent in the interviews then, because people reported mixed emotions, not just a mixture of positive emotions or a mixture of negative emotions, but actually a mixture of positive and negative emotions to the same artwork. There was variation in participants' experience. This was a real exhibition, and participants were recruited either after they had seen it or during their visit to the exhibition. We didn't control for their experience, and so there were some differences. Some of the video and sound artworks were unfortunately not working all of the time. Some participants did not see all of the artworks. In evaluating their responses to the artworks, I was using the photographs as a tool for sorting purposes and also to remind, as a reminder of the artworks themselves. But of course, some of the artworks did not photograph as well as others. Some recommendations. Firstly, in hindsight, it would have been helpful if I'd given participants a map upon recruitment. That would have helped reduce the risk that they didn't see all of the artworks. Alternatively, of course, you could control for that and recruit before people see the exhibition or upon entry to the exhibition. And it would have been interesting, I think, to recruit more participants with less experience of contemporary art. So this exhibition was held at a school of art, and possibly if it had been held at a community venue, numbers would have been different in that respect. But in conclusion, Q methodology is effective at identifying patterns of emotional response to artworks amongst participants. And it was also effective at eliciting both positive and negative emotional responses to artworks. And by doing so non-verbally, because people were just arranging the photographs before they were asked to articulate what their emotional responses were. So I suggest that Q methodology is therefore a valuable tool for assessing the impact of art, whether that's emotional impact, or perhaps it could also be used for other kinds of impacts too. And I suggest the finding about the different perceptions of negative emotions is important, and that certainly warrants further research. So I'm happy now to answer any questions that people may have, and look forward to our discussion.